Bulavinaka, everyone, and greetings from the Pacific to you all. I apologize for the long name. Barbara wasn't our doing. We're stuck with it, I'm afraid. First of all, I'd just like to thank the organizers for allowing us some time and space on the agenda to talk to you a little bit about the Pacific. When we tell stories in Fiji, we say we talanoa. So I'd like to talanoa with you today and give you a little bit of an example and a flavor of what we do. I'd also like to acknowledge other colleagues who have been working in this area in the Pacific region, particularly the Pacific wash specialist, Mr. Mark Overmars, who's somewhere in the room, I think. Also, Mr. Dave Hebblethwaite, who's not here with me today, but helped me put these slides together. And the project manager from Tuvalu, who isn't with us as well. I've got a case study that I'll talk about, and he was instrumental in that work. So I'd like to acknowledge them. Of course, my brothers and sisters from the Pacific region who are here with us today as well. So shout out to you all. So moving on to the presentation. I'm going to talk to you around 4 areas. One is key wash issues facing the Pacific region. And I think this is important and it's useful because we are quite different from the rest of the world. Sanjay will talk to you a little bit about how we're faring against the Millennium Development Goals. The second part of my talk will explore, can eco-sanitation be a part of the solution? I'll then go on to the Tuvalu experience in particular and round up with some successes that we've experienced as part of that work. So to the first area that I'd like to explore, and this is around the Pacific having very limited and fragile water resources. So in order for me to get this point across, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about a comparison between Brisbane, where we're all at this week, and South Tarawa, which is a populated urban environment, a populated urban center in the Republic of Kiribati. And some of the stats around this we've been able to pull together to share with you what we're talking about when we're talking about fragile, limited water resources. So from some of the research we did around this, we found out that Brisbane has a consumption of water of about 175 litres per person per day. If you compare that with what we know, it could get up to 300 litres per person per day as well. That's not uncommon. And I gather this is from a very reputable source of the Brisbane Times. Correct me if you will, those of you who are from Brisbane. If you compare that with South Tarawa, so that's one small part of the Republic of Kiribati, their per capita share of sustainable yield is around 38 litres per person per day. Now let's explore that further. If you look at that 38 litres per person per day, you account for the impacts of climate change on that resource, which is estimated to be about 20% on that sustainable yield by 2030. And when we're talking about the impacts of climate change on that resource, we're talking about things like saltwater intrusion into the groundwater, which is their main source of water supply, alongside rainwater as well, or storm surges as well as changes to rainfall patterns affecting the groundwater recharge, especially in times of drought. So if you looked at that impact, you take 30 litres down to 15 litres per person per day. Again, if you account for population growth, which is estimated to double by the year 2030, you're down to 5 litres per person per day, in addition to accounting for estimated losses of 67%, which they currently face on their system. South Tarawa experienced 67% in losses on their distribution system due to leakage and operation and maintenance issues. So if we look at what minimum standards are in terms of humanitarian responses for water, this is often at 15 litres per person per day. as recognized sphere standards. So if nothing else changes in South Tarawa, and these effects happen on the water supply system and on the resource, we're down to 15 liters per person per day by the year 2013. So quite confronting for a small island developing state, an atoll island environment, where they're at the pointy edge of the sword in terms of all sorts of things happening. So that's something I'd like to just share with you in terms of the fragility of that resource from all sorts of impacts. Let's look at the issue of small and isolated and informal communities. In terms of this particular part, I'd like to share with you an example from Christmas Island. Again, in the Republic of Kiribati. It's in the northern group of the Line Islands of Christmas Island. Captain Cook went by the Christmas Island, and on Christmas Day apparently, and that's how it got its name. In the local language, they call it Kiritimati. It is the largest coral atoll in the world with a total land area of 640 kilometers squared. The height of the island is from 1 to 4 meters. The main source of water supply is groundwater on the island, and what little they can get from rainwater, as this part of the Pacific doesn't receive a lot of rainfall. This water is used to support a population of approximately 7,000 to 8,000 people across several spread out communities. In terms of wash challenges in an environment like this, the next picture, which I hope will come up in a second, was taken in the main school, which caters for around 750 students from primary through to secondary school grades. They currently do not have water supply on the system, into the school, and their public supply is not connected due to several operation and maintenance issues. I might need some tech support here just to get me to the next slide. Apparently, here we go. The system, as I mentioned, doesn't have a water supply that goes into the school at the moment. And so students bring bottles of water to school from their home, which you see here, as well as bars of soap. So they recognize that it's important to be hygienic, to wash your hands after going to the toilet and after doing eating and playing. There are, however, 3 toilets in the school, but they're not connected to any form of water supply, so that is a challenge. So some small improvements to this situation can, in fact, provide some really quick gains. Perhaps if I share with you a little bit about some of the human and financial resources, which is also another limiting factor and challenge. The lack of capacity is a major challenge for us in the Pacific region in terms of human resources. If we did the numbers, we'd probably find there are between possibly 3 to 4 qualified, experienced hydrogeologists that are within the government departments across the Pacific. And these are to support the national hydrological services that exist where they do. Most of the work is done at the operational hydrology level, and as well as water and sanitation engineering. And I'm talking about Pacific Island nationals who take up this charge. A lot of capacity is lost due to brain drain. We in the region just can't compete with the markets overseas, where we lose a lot of our good people to. But also, alongside that, of course, institutional capacity is lost as well, because a lot of the corporate knowledge and history is taken along with those people. In terms of financial resources, there is a lot of development partner support to Pacific Island countries, and this is expected to increase even further in the coming years, more specifically bilaterally. We've found that in the work that we're doing, we're experiencing this as well. However, sometimes some of this support is not within a broader development framework at the national level, and so we have to support the countries in bringing that together in a coordinated, organized approach. National budget support is often not available to sustain those services beyond the life of a project. So we go back to build, fix, replace, sometimes there's a cycle. So maybe just touching on the area of vulnerability to climate variability and change and disasters as well. Some of you may have seen some of this media coming out in 2011 when Tuvalu declared a state of emergency due to the impacts of a severe drought. This drew worldwide attention to the issue of droughts, in a small island developing country and in the Pacific region. The reality is that, as unfortunate as the event is, it provided opportunities for attention and action, which sometimes isn't otherwise there. This is often the case with water and sanitation in the region, in that we can be advocating for improved drought management, flood management, and dare I say hydrological monitoring, and this will not get as much traction in peace times as when a disaster strikes. So we use those opportunities where they are. So what's our take on climate change in the Pacific? It's at least from the perspective of the SPC Water and Sanitation Program, and also some of the partners that we've been working with. Whilst we recognize that water and sanitation is a fundamental human right, and water security is linked to the development goals and targets in the region, including the existing MDGs and the forthcoming Sustainable Development Goals, our current focus and activity area has been addressing the daily challenges in the sector, which I've spoken to a little bit previously. This spans across the provision of sustainable services of water and sanitation, strengthening water resources monitoring, strengthening water governance from community to cabinet. Across the Pacific, the uncertainty and extremes of climate variability compound and exacerbate these management challenges. Most countries still remain unprepared for floods and extended droughts that are an ongoing feature in our region. The serious and emerging impacts of climate change add another new dimension to the problem, threatening resources, increasing uncertainties, and in many cases intensifying the extremes of existing climate variability. Therefore, in our mind, managing water-related impacts of climate variability and change requires a risk-based approach to better manage water, which is the primary medium through which the climate change impacts affect people's livelihoods and well-being, most often in the region. So, can eco-sanitation be a part of the solution? In our discussions and in the work and the reviews that we've been doing, we've found that it can reduce household use of water supply by around 30%, and that's a project that we've been working on in Tuvalu has shown that. A lot of the driving change at the community level for the use of eco-sanitation, more specifically composting toilets, is because they get more water. And that's simply a basic reality. This is equivalent to around 8 to 10 kiloliters in terms of water per year. Groundwater protection, a big aspect of the use of eco-sanitation, because it prevents the contamination into the groundwater from what would otherwise be leaking septic tanks, pit latrines, and inappropriately constructed sanitation systems into an already fragile groundwater system and nearby lagoon and environment. In terms of food security, when you have atoll environments without a lot of land and natural capacity to store water and soil, this compost from the eco-sanitation options provides a valuable source of organic material. In terms of health, simply containing the waste in one system prevents it from getting into the groundwater, and therefore the impacts on health in that regard. And resilience, which I've spoken to a little bit previously, conserves water while fully functional during droughts. Houses that have these systems can use water for other things, which they wouldn't have had otherwise if they had other types of sanitation options. So specifically, the Tuvalu wash experience. The Millennium Development Goals that are coming out in the 2013 update as part of the JMP state that Tuvalu specifically has an 83% of total population using improved sanitation and 98% of the total population using improved water supply. Now, That 83% using improved sanitation could be systems that are considered, that are often poorly constructed, such as septic tanks, that are not poorly constructed to contain the waste in its entirety. And this sometimes goes directly into the groundwater and into the nearby lagoon, as I mentioned. In terms of the 98% using improved water supply, this does not, however, say anything about the reliability of the supply, especially in times of droughts. So is this water for everyone, everywhere, and all of the time? In terms of the implementation of the Tuvalu Wash experience, this is a GEF-funded, Global Environmental Funded Facility-funded project, which we're currently running in 13 Pacific Island countries. Tuvalu is one of them. It has been ongoing for the last 5 years. And the CT experience in Tuvalu goes back many, many years now, where they first started to look at using that as an option. You know, I can think back maybe 10, 15 years ago. So it's really good that we've been able to take this up under the GEF project and move that along further. So we knew from past examples that the success could not be about the technology only, because there have been examples enough in the region around focusing on the technology specifically. So we knew that sustainability had to be approached a different way, and not necessarily driven by financial sustainability as a key factor only to engender the buy-in. So in that regard, we focused on getting the basics right in the technology in terms of composting toilets, so ensuring that the chambers were built properly, but that wasn't where the interest was from most householders. They weren't interested in the composting process. They weren't interested in the chambers per se. That's not where their interest lay or was focused. So we tried to localize the solution as much as possible, where we had, or the project manager and the national project team actually named it, the composting toilet is in a local name, Falevati. They took it on a roadshow around the island, showing off, if you will, what the toilet to many of the communities and people who may have an interest in taking this on. We cultivated desire, which was initially expensive, but we needed to get over the barrier of some of the, the challenges that composting toilets had in the past. This is where most people were interested. Did they feel that it was an improvement on their current system? Did they feel good about using the toilet and the environment that they were in? Some of the things we took into account was the need for a lower staircase for easy access, water tanks so that they could be connected to the toilet structure to wash hands, overhanging roofs to protect from the weather, increased structural ability to have more than one person or two people using it, which is often the case in a Pacific community. And this did help the buy-in process quite a bit. So that's someone who's taking the time to organize his organic matter that needs to go into the compost toilet, and making an effort. Cultivating community acceptance. Alongside the composting toilet implementation of the hardware, there was a strong community and targeted community awareness campaign alongside this, with community groups as well as the National Water and Sanitation Committee, which were part of a national planning process that was also running alongside this work too. We utilized resulting enabling environments where we could. Whilst the demonstration was being rolled out, we also had a national policy process in play at the same time, which supported a consultation process to develop a national water and sanitation policy for Tuvalu. Not many countries in the region have a national policy for water and sanitation, and so Tuvalu is one of them, so it was something that they were quite proud of, they felt involved in. But they also included sanitation as part of that exercise because it was a mutually reinforcing piece of work. because they saw the benefits of on-the-ground demonstrations and had taken that up within their policy direction process. So these are some pictures from the consultation process, which included women's groups on their own sometimes, men's group on their own sometimes, and then a joint exercise where we had everybody come together where it was appropriate to do so. So some of the successes that we'd like to replicate, for one, is reducing the costs of the actual CT itself. It was expensive, but we needed to get over that initial feeling that they did want to do this, that it can work, because there's been so many examples in the region where it hasn't. So that's some of the things we're looking into, improving designs and economies of scale. We've supported Tuvalu to share this work across the Pacific region, in Tonga, in the Marshall Islands, in Nauru, in Kiribati and beyond. There's a regional network and partnership that has been established as part of this project. So Tuvalu is part of a network of IWRM professionals across the 14 Pacific Island countries. They visit each other, they share lessons learned, whether it be on email or websites or meetings. And we've provided from our side an ongoing, sustained technical backstopping support to this whole effort, which I think has been part of the success. So in terms of how some of the other toilets are looking, that's the Tuvalu systems. We've installed 40 systems on Funafuti. There's also been 2 systems trialed in Vanuatu, in Santo. There have been 2 systems trialed in Nauru as well at a school, and 2 systems trialed in Tonga. And Marshall Islands have also trialed 3 systems at a very significant lens that feeds Majuro, because of the successes they've seen from some of the other country work. If I can, I'd just like to share a 3-minute video on this, if I may.
The water situation in Tuvalu highlights the complex interconnectedness of water and sanitation issues to economic development, health, food security, and continual viability of small atoll nations. The need to conserve water while at the same time preventing the continued pollution of groundwater and the surrounding marine environment is a high priority for the Tuvaluan government. The Global Environment Facility is currently running an integrated water resources management pilot project in Tuvalu that aims to show how composting toilets can both conserve water and prevent septic pollution. It has the add-on benefit of producing compost that can enrich the poor atoll soils and increase household food production.
PWD's role is mainly to facilitate the implementation of the IWRM project in terms of supporting and assisting the technical aspect of the project. We can assist them from the planning, monitoring and execution of the project.
We are trying to actually promote the using of compost toilet as a dry eco sanitation in Tuvalu. The purpose of because using of composting toilet was actually going to save water and as well reduce the impact of wastewater in our environment. And that's why we actually looking at compost toilet as our preferred sanitation, dry eco sanitation in Tuvalu.
So why are composting toilets better than the current septic systems?
The compost toilet doesn't use water, so actually save water in that way. And even doing composting is like saving the environment as well. Looking at the problems in the environment, saving those waste water going into the environment. And we think that the compost toilet works both ways, solving the water source problems and also looking at the waste problem in Tuvalu.
The kissing of the toilet ini, kena Allah kamu tahu tunggu tamu, tamu tahu lah, olah si dewa itu, mailung ada orang toilet tamu, kena kau ngawai, olah si de, tiang apa ye pokok untuk kain, nah, jangan apa, itu tenamo telah si dewa ida kau ngai tamu, mai lawe ama pun dah tu paket ini. Taimi dah simpai no pa ono paket dia so. Adi no de paket dia no lita ne. Ti onde 2 lita e vai o vale de aso. Nei abbiamo se lasci de vai e vale.
And finally, come Valentine's Day, it's a good signpost for love letters. Asenate love sika. Thank you, everyone. Vinakvaleu.